Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's HHS Commercialization Readiness Pilot Program, CRP Informational webinar. My name is Betty Royster, and I will be your webinar moderator today. This is a reminder that the slides, transcript, and recording will be posted on sbir.nih.gov in the coming days, and we will send a follow-up email to our listserv when these materials are available online. Today's first speaker will be Dr. Matthew Portnoy, who is the HHS, SBIR, and STTR Program Coordinator. And with that, I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you very much, Betty, and good afternoon, everyone, from cloudy and rainy Bethesda, Maryland, and the NIH. My name is Matt Portnoy, and I'm here with Stephanie Fertig to co-present this webinar with you. Stephanie is the SBIR STTR Program Coordinator from the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, or NINDS, one of the 24 institutes that has an SBIR STTR program. Today, we'll be discussing this brand new program that HHS has called a Commercialization Readiness Pilot Program. We'll first be discussing the statutory authority for the program, and we'll be referring to it as the CRP throughout the webinar. We'll then be discussing the basics of the CRP mechanism and how it works. We'll be discussing a pair of funding opportunity announcements that we issued a short while ago about the CRP. Then we'll be answering some questions that were pre-submitted by you, our webinar attendees, and then we will have open Q&A at the end. You can send your questions in through the question box on your webinar console. We may or may not be able to get all of your questions. If we can't, certainly feel free to follow up with an email to us afterwards. And as Betty said, the slides, transcript, and recording of this webinar will be posted on sbir.nih.gov within a few days, and we will send an email out to everyone to let them know they're there. The main website for finding the CRP solicitations is shown at the bottom of this slide, sbir.nih.gov/funding#CRP. The Commercialization Readiness Pilot Program statutory authority comes from the SBIR STTR Reauthorization Act of 2011, shown at the bottom of the slide. Section 5123 of the Act talks about a Commercialization Readiness Pilot Program for civilian agencies. As you may or may not know, a CRP was piloted prior for Department of Defense, and that Department of Defense CRP program is now a permanent program. The DoD CRP program and the program I'm going to describe here today are very different. So if you're familiar with the Department of Defense CRP program, pay particular attention to the differences here. According to statute, with the CRP authority, an agency can spend up to 10% of its agency SBIR program by budget. As you'll hear momentarily, both the NIH and CDC are participating in this CRP, and last fiscal year, the combined SBIR program was a little short of $700 million, so 10% means that we can spend roughly up to $70 million for CRP. This is up to. We are not required to spend up to that or up to that, but that's our maximum. The two bullets, A and B, are the statutory description of the types of work that can be funded under the CRP. For awards, for technology development, testing, evaluation, and commercialization assistance for SBIR and STTR Phase 2 technologies. Or to support the progress of research and development, and commercialization conducted under the SBIR STTR programs to Phase 3. The statutory authority limits the amount of money we are able to award under the CRP to 3 times the SBIR Phase 2 budget guideline. The current Phase 2 guideline is $1 million. Therefore, a maximum CRP award that we are authorized to give is $3 million, total costs, direct costs, indirect costs, and fee in all years. This is the guideline is not the hard cap of $1.5 million. The guideline is $1 million. So the CRP max is $3 million. I want to emphasize this throughout, that this CRP is a pilot authority provided under the Reauthorization Act, and the pilot authority expires at the end of fiscal year 2017, or on 9/30/2017. That is the last date that we as an agency can make a new competing CRP award. Excuse me, bear with me a little bit. I'm working with a cold today. So the ability for us to make awards, new awards past this amount will depend on either the extension of the pilot or being made permanent in the next reauthorization, which is coming up in a few years. Some of the basics about the CRP here at HHS. We have issued 2 CRP grant funding opportunity announcements called FOAs. We released them on November 2nd, 2015. We're going to emphasize this again over and over. It's incredibly important you read these solicitations and all the aspects of it. It's a pilot. You will note here and throughout that only some of the NIH and CDC institutes and centers are participating, not all. And so we have a small handful of institutes and centers that are piloting the program. We have 2 FOAs, solicitations. Some institutes are on one, some on the other, and some are on both. And you have to read very carefully who is on what. Because it's a new authority, we developed a new activity code for this mechanism called SB1. An activity code is a way in which we identify the type of activity. If you're familiar with SBIR and STTR, the activity code for SBIR is R43 for Phase 1 and R44 for Phase 2. STTR is R41 for Phase 1 STTR, R42 for Phase 2. CRPs will be SB1. And to note that a CRP is neither a Phase 1 nor a Phase 2 award. It is also not a Phase 3 award, which is commercialization. Essentially, the CRP is somewhere in between Phase 2 and 3, but we will be calling it a CRP award. A CRP applicant and awardee must be an SBIR eligible small business, since we're using SBIR funding to fund the CRP program, meaning that all of the rules about SBIR companies must be met, with the majority owned by U.S. citizens or permanent residents, or owned by another small businesses that are SBIR eligible, or venture capital backed companies. The applicant and awardee is still the small business. Additionally, the CRP applicant and awardee must have received an HHS, SBIR, or STTR Phase 2 or 2B. A Phase 2B is a second sequential Phase 2 within the past 3 years. So it could be a current Phase 2 or 2B, or it could be one that was active within the past 3 years. This means that applicants with Phase 2s from other agencies are not eligible to apply to the HHS CRP program. Additionally, as we'll see in a moment, only institutes that are participating in the CRP will accept CRP applications from Phase 2s within their institute. We'll elaborate that more in a moment. I want to repeat the website where you can find the funding solicitations. It's shown here. Excuse me. You can get there from the main page, sbir.nih.gov. You could click on the funding tab on the left and you will find it, or you can get there directly through here. There are 2 solicitations, PAR 16-026 and 16-027. The links are shown here and are on the website. The first one I'll be talking about is 026, and Stephanie will be taking over and discussing 027 and discussing other aspects of the CRP program in a few moments. 16026 is called SBIR STTR, Commercialization Readiness Pilot Program, CRP, Technical Assistance. 027 is called Technical Assistance and Late Stage Development. You'll see in a moment when we get into specifics, there is some overlap in the types of activities that can be funded by each of these and other differences and similarities as well. For both CRP FOAs, they will use the standard SBIR due dates. These are January 5th, April 5th, and September 5th. These two FOAs will accept applications on those dates in 2015, 2016, and January 5th and April 5th, 2017. April 5th, 2017 is the last due date for the CRP. There will not be a September 5th, 2017 due date because the authority expires September 30th. These FOAs expire April 6, 2017, and all types of applications are due on these dates, including AIDS, so there are no separate AIDS dates. Both of these solicitations have an optional letter of intent. A letter of intent is simply a way to inform the agency that you might apply. A letter of intent is optional, and it is also not binding. You are not required to submit a letter of intent, and if you do submit a letter of intent, you are not actually required to submit an application. We use letters of intent to give us a heads up on how many applications may be coming in, and what types of scientific areas they might be, so we can start to begin to plan the review, which we'll come to in a moment. The solicitations indicate that letters of intent are due 30 days before each deadline. And letters of intent can be sent by email to the scientific review officer in charge of the review. For both of these FOAs, we have two, Dr. Kristen Kramer and Dr. Jean Costilla, but Dr. Kristen Kramer will be receiving the letters of intent, and her information is listed in both solicitations in the letter of intent section, both a phone number and an email address. But note, letters of intent, again, are optional, not required, nor are they binding. CRP submission. Applicants can use Assist, which is our new electronic submission system, or they can continue to use the downloadable forms, as with all SBIR solicitations. January 5th is the first date that Assist can be used for anything, and if you have questions about the Assist program, we did a webinar a month ago about the Assist system, and you can go to our webinar events page and find that information there. The Phase 2 predicate for the CRP could be a Phase 2 grant or a Phase 2 contract. If it's a Phase 2B, it will always be a grant, since we don't offer Phase 2Bs in contracts. CRP awards are all grants. And as I said, you have to be an HHS Phase 2 or 2B awardee to be able to apply for a CRP. Because of the unique nature of this program, we have some very special instructions in our solicitation. We'll touch on this a little bit later, but specifically for submission, on the SBIR STTR info form, if you're familiar with applying, under program type, there are two choices, SBIR and STTR. And the instructions will tell you in the solicitation and here, you must check SBIR for the CRP submission, regardless of whether you're Phase 2 or 2B, which predicates the CRP, was an SBIR or STTR. So either way, just check SBIR. The next section talks about SBIR STTR type. On this part of the form, it says Phase 1, Phase 2, or Fast Track. You're required to check Phase 2 because CRP awards are follow-on awards to Phase 2 or 2B. And at this time, we don't have a separate CRP button within that box. We are working on that, but it is not there yet. You then answer the rest of the questions on the form and answer questions 8 and 9, which are specific to the SBIR program. Essentially, treat it like an SBIR grant for the purposes of the SBIR info form. This slide will be talking about some of the similarities and the main difference between a CRP and the SBIR program. So the small business concern applicant must meet and continue to meet the SBIR company eligibility requirements related to the number of employees, the ownership structure, etc. Like an SBIR, the CRP principal investigator must be primarily employed at the small business at the time of award and during the award. the primary employment, which is defined as greater than half-time appointment, is not related to the effort of the PI on the grant. The PI may have any effort that's appropriate for the grant, less than 50%, and that's fine, but the employment must be majority. Here's the key difference between a CRP and an SBIR. If you're familiar with SBIR, you are aware that there are subcontracting limitations on SBIR. SBIR companies can subcontract a maximum of up to 1/3 in phase 1 and half in phase 2 by budget. We helped conceive the CRP program to allow SBCs to subcontract a substantial portion of its CRP award to third parties through both consultant and subcontractual arrangements. So in a case where, for instance, contracting out to a CRO, this could be done with the majority of the budget. However, the small business must still perform a substantive role in the conduct of the plan research and oversight. They need to provide and demonstrate, both in their budget and in their budget justification, they've got appropriate oversight of all scientific, programmatic, financial, and administrative matters related to the grant. And it cannot merely serve as a conduit of funds to another party or parties. So what this means is that you cannot sub out 100% of the grant. We're not providing specific guidance on a percentage, a maximum percentage, but there needs to be a certain amount of effort done at the company to oversee the CRP and a certain amount of money. And whether that's 10 or 20% or some other appropriate amount, that's up to you, and that will be evaluated both by peer review in the budget section and by program staff and grants management staff prior to award. But the 50% limitation in phase 2, SBIR is not here in the CRP. All right, so now I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the first solicitation, PAR 16026, called technical assistance. What's shown here is from the funding opportunity purpose, and I just want to draw your attention to the red text, which says this type of award will provide additional support for technical assistance not typically supported through phase 2 or 2B grants or contracts. This may include preparation of documents for the FDA, development of intellectual property strategy, and or planning for a clinical trial, not conducting a clinical trial. That's an important distinction. This solicitation is for technical assistance only, and I already see some questions in the box that we'll be addressing. The link is again shown here for this. You can also just Google PAR-16-026 and you'll find it. This is the list of institutes and centers that are on this solicitation. There are 8 NIH institutes and 1 CDC center. NINDS, NHLBI, NIA, NIAAA, NIBIB, NIDDK, NIEHS, NCATS, and the CDC, National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, or NCCDPHP. These institutes and these institutes alone CRP submissions. And as such, the predicate phase 2 or 2B must be from these institutes. So if your phase 2 or 2B is from another federal agency or from an NIH institute or CDC component not on this list, then you are not eligible to apply to this solicitation, this CRP solicitation. I know that's obviously going to be unfortunate for some of you on the line, and not all institutes are on this. This is a pilot program, and so we are piloting it with some of our institutes and centers. What happens in the future will depend on how the pilot. So keep that in mind. Also, you'll note that when Stephanie gets to the other solicitation, you'll see a overlapping but slightly different list of institutes. Budget specifics for PA 16026. While the CRP maximum is $3 million, this solicitation limits total costs to $300,000 for technical assistance for the entire project period, regardless of number of years. The three institutes below, NHLBI, NIDDK, and NEHS, have each set separate limitations underneath the $300,000. So NHLBI will support up to $50,000, NIDDK up to $150,000, and NIHS up to $200,000 over both years of the project, and the maximum budget period is 2 years. And so you'll see in a moment why this limitation, the other solicitation you'll hear about, goes higher. Types of activities that are supported under this solicitation include but are not limited to development of regulatory strategy, designing and planning for a clinical trial, development of an intellectual property strategy, technical assistance often associated with manufacturing, and other technical assistance offered through a third-party assistance provider, including some types of market research. Essentially, what the intent of this solicitation is for the company to bring on a technical consultant or assistance vendor to give them advice they need in various different areas of their project, specific to the needs of the project. And so these are the types of activities that are encouraged under this solicitation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie Fertig from NINDS to take over from here, and I'll be back in the end to help moderate the question and answer session. Stephanie.
Thank you, Matt. So the second, as Matt indicated, we do have 2 CRPs, and the second CRP program announcement is for both technical assistance and late-stage development. And again, we put the purpose of the funding opportunity, that program announcement, up. And as you can see, we've highlighted in red the major differences between, the major components of this CRP, and it helps highlight some of the differences between this CRP and the other CRP. So this provides additional support for technical assistance and later stage research and development not typically supported through Phase 2 or Phase 2B grants or contracts. And this can include independent replication of key studies, IND enabling studies, clinical studies, etc. And we'll go into exactly what it covers in a few minutes. So if we go to the next slide, apparently there's a slight delay on my end. There we go. This is for technical assistance and late-stage research and development. So it covers more than the other CRP, and we've put the link to this specific program announcement here. Now there are 9 NIH institutes and centers that are participating: NINDS, NEI, NIA, NIAAA, NIAID, NIAMS, NIDCR, NIDDK, and NIMH. And as Matt noted, this is a different list from the other program announcement. And in order for you to apply to this specific program announcement, you have to currently have or have had a Phase 2 or Phase 2B from one of these specific institutes and centers. So if we can go to the next slide. So we're going to be looking at the budget now. So the budget, as Matt noted, for this program announcement is much larger than for the other program announcement. We allow for budgets up to $3 million in total funding support, direct costs, indirect costs, and fee for the entire budget period. Now, some institutes may have different budget guidelines. For example, NIAID says that the budgets may not exceed $1 million total funding support in any year. NIAMS states that budget may not exceed $400,000 total funding support in any year. NIDCR says you can exceed $1 million in total funding support in any year. NIDDK doesn't allow you to exceed $1 million overall over the entire over the entire project. And for NEI, budgets may not exceed $500,000 total funding support in any year. So I think this is a great point to, again, emphasize the importance of contacting your program officer, contacting the individuals who are on that program announcement, and asking if what you're planning to propose is appropriate for the CRP. I think communication with program officials is critical for both of these announcements. The maximum budget period for this CRP program announcement is 3 years. Next slide. And so there it is. So what exactly is covered in this program announcement? Well, similar to the other program announcement, you can ask for technical assistance, and we have the same technical assistance activities that were in the prior, that Matt read previously, is in this program announcement. So I'm not going to go through them in detail, but again, it really affords you the ability to work with a technical assistance provider or a contractor or contract resource organization to give you some of the technical assistance necessary to move your device or your product or your drug to market. So next slide, we're going to discuss the research and development components of what might be allowed through a CRP. And what you can see here is, and this is the first slide of 3 slides, where we gave a lot of examples in the program announcement of what could potentially be included. Now, this isn't meant to be an exhaustive list, and again, this is why it's important to contact program staff prior to applying. But this program allows you to do some of the later stage research and development activities that you might not normally find in every phase 2 or phase 2B. For example, you can do independent replication and confirmation of key studies. You can do the activities to ensure compliance with applicable, FDA requirements and good manufacturing practice standards. Everything from, looking at some large animal studies that are GLP compliant. And if you go to the next slide, I'm not going to read every one of these because I think we want to leave plenty of time for questions, and this can take a while. But as you can see, we include, ADME, tox studies, IND enabling, other IND enabling studies, looking at process optimization and synthesis. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that everything, optimization of delivery, manufacturing of the clinical trial supplies, and in some cases, clinical studies and clinical trials. Now, the clinical studies and clinical trials is an important thing to note for this CRP program announcement. Not all institutes who are listed will accept clinical trials through this program announcement. Now, that's clinical trials as defined by the NIH, which is different from the FDA definition. So it's important that you talk to your program official if you're planning to propose human studies as part of your CRP, because you want to make sure that the institute that you're applying through will accept the clinical study that you're proposing. Specifically, NINDS, NIAID, NIDCR, NIAMS, NIMH, and NIAAA will not accept clinical trials through the CRP. So if you are planning to do a clinical trial, again, it's critical that you contact program staff well in advance of your application. So if we can have the next slide, we can talk a little bit about what makes the CRP different from your standard SBIR and STTR grant application. If you look at the program announcements, you'll see that there's specific section about the application, and there's additional components there that are not in the standard omnibus solicitation program announcement or maybe another more standard SBIR program announcement. Now, similar to the standard SBIR, you do need to have the the SBA SBC registry PDF. So you need to have registered with the SBA, and you need to provide that PDF document in your application. If your small business is one of the part of the venture capital owned business, so it's majority owned by multiple venture capital firms, you do need to still provide that certification. Again, exactly like a standard SBIR grant. The budget is different, and as Matt noted, the small business can actually outsource much more of the CRP than in a standard SBIR grant. However, you have to be able to provide appropriate oversight of all scientific, programmatic, financial, and administrative matters related to the grant. So yes, you can outsource the majority of the work here, but you really do need to be providing that substantive role. In addition, we don't allow the filing fees associated with filing patents or FDA submissions to be part of the budget. So you can't include those as part of your CRP. So if we go to the next slide, we can see some of that the research plan is also different, and there's some additional instructions for significance, innovation, and approach that are part of these applications. The letters of support here are really important, and that makes sense. If you're outsourcing more of the grant, it's really important to get the letters of support from those individuals who will be performing some of the work. But there's other components of the significance, innovation, and approach that are different as well. It is really important that you read the instructions in the FOA very, very carefully. Again, this is different from a standard SBIR grant. And if you have any questions about those, please contact program staff. So for the information form, make sure you read carefully. As Matt noted, there's additional, make sure you follow the instructions for checking the SBIR and Phase 2 boxes. And there are additional instructions for the commercialization plan as well. So it's not just the research plan. Read through that carefully. It includes, for example, a fundraising plan, so that's an important component that you need to include. And again, answer questions 8 and 9 specific to the SBIR. So the next slide. So a little bit about the peer review of the CRP, and we do today have the scientific review officers who are associated with this program with us, so they'll be able to address questions that you might have about the review. But there will be a special review panel convened by the Center for Scientific Review. As Matt noted, the scientific review officers the contacts have changed, and the contact information is now in the program announcement. The review criteria, which is in Section 5 of the program announcement, has also been changed, and it's specific for the Commercialization Readiness Pilot, or the CRP. Now, that review criteria is critical, and I would encourage anyone who's interested in applying to the CRP to read through it very carefully. Those are the questions that reviewers are going to be asking themselves as they read your application. So it's really important that you think about those questions when you're writing your application. And some additional review criteria on the commercialization plan and fundraising plan are located in that specific review criteria. And it also includes progress on your Phase 2 or your Phase 2B. So you should note what progress you've made to date. And I can't emphasize this enough as we're moving to the next slide. You have to read these program announcements carefully. So the other thing I can't emphasize enough, and if you take nothing from the presentation today, please talk to your NIH program officer about your application. Talk to us well in advance of applying. We can help determine if the CRP is the best program for you, make sure that that's the right place for you to submit, or there might be other programs at the specific institute that you're calling that may be a better fit for you. So contact us. We can help guide you through the process. And submit early, not in hours and minutes, but days early. So you can find the program officer contact information on the specific program announcements, on those CRP program announcements. You can also find it at sbir.nih.gov. It's a great website and a wealth of information. If you're not sure who to contact, the NIH SBIR Office of the Director has an email address, sbir@od.nih.gov. They do answer all those questions and can make sure that you get to the appropriate contact. So we had some questions that were submitted in advance. I'm going to try to go through those now, and then we're going to open it up to other questions. As I'm reading these questions that were submitted in advance, if you have additional questions, please ask those questions in the questions box that's on the GoToWebinar, and we'll try to answer as many of those as we possibly can. So one question that we've been getting is, does the Phase 2 have to be funded before the CRP application can be submitted? Or another one is, do you need to have a Phase 2 in order to apply for the CRP? And the answer is yes. You have to have either an active Phase 2 or have had a Phase 2 in the past 36 months. So you do need to have a Phase 2 or have had an active Phase 2. And that CRP is going to be about that Phase 2 that you either have active or had at one point in the recent past. So can the Phase 2 and the CRP be active at the same time? Yes, it can. This is one of the distinctive differences between the CRP and the Phase 2B. They can be active at the same time, and so you can apply for the CRP while your Phase 2 or your Phase 2B is ongoing. Are the CRP and the Phase 2B mutually exclusive? The answer is no. However, if you have a Phase 2B right now and you're considering applying for a CRP, or you're not sure whether you should apply for the Phase 2B or the CRP, I would encourage you to talk to your program official. They can help you make decisions, they can help you with the strategy there, and potentially get you information about the benefits and drawbacks to both of the programs so that you can make an informed decision on how best to proceed. If I have a Phase 2 from an NIH Institute Center or another agency that does not participate, can I come in for a project under an institute and center that does? Unfortunately, you cannot. You have to have a Phase 2 or a Phase 2B with one of the institutes or centers that's currently participating. So right now, as Matt indicated, this is a pilot program, and you need to have a Phase 2 or Phase 2B with one of those participating institutes and centers. Could the CRP be submitted by the same PI, but from a company, also a small business, other than the company that was the recipient of the original Phase 2 funding? And the answer here is yes, actually. You can have a situation where the small business may change between a Phase 2 and a CRP. And this can happen if, say, the company either changes significantly or branches off or has the PI join another company. And it's similar to what can happen between a Phase 1 and a Phase 2. However, this is a complex situation, and I would encourage you, if you have this kind of situation, to talk to program staff before applying. The other company would have to be willing to allow you to do that, allow you to kind of take over the Phase 2. So you really need to talk to us in advance before you apply if you're in this specific situation. Would the regulatory assistance and clinical studies needed for the CPT code application be qualified as CRP costs? And I'm going to bundle that in with the one right under it, which is, would the review prioritize FDA regulatory costs over reimbursement submission costs? So reimbursement submission costs, while not specifically listed, are allowed, and we're not prioritizing one type of technical assistance over another. But please keep in mind it is technical assistance. And this kind of leads into the next question, which is marketing work allowed? And again, marketing, if you're looking at, say, market research or trying to understand what, maybe what other components your product may need to reach the appropriate market, that's fine. But what we can't cover is sales. So we're not going to help you build your sales force or increase sales of your product. So that kind of work, the commercialization itself or phase 3 component is not covered here. It is prior to that phase 3 commercialization. Does the CRP follow SBIR policies associated with work in foreign countries? Yes, it does. Similar to the standard SBIR, in a CRP, the work should be done in the United States unless there is a clear justification as to why it cannot be done in the United States and has to be done overseas. Again, this is something that if you're in this situation, you should definitely contact your program official well in advance of applying to see if it is possible for you to do that work overseas and what you would need to do in order to make sure that the appropriate approvals are done in that specific institute. And finally, if an institute, NINDS, NIAAA, and NIDDK, participates in both FOAs, which one do I apply to? Well, all 3 of those institutes have decided that if they're participating in both FOAs, that if you're asking for only technical assistance, you should come in through the technical assistance only program announcement. However, if you're asking for both technical assistance and late-stage research and development, or just late-stage research and development, you should come in through that second commercialization, the second CRP that I was discussing, which includes both technical assistance and late-stage research and development. And again, this is another situation where contacting your program official is critical. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Matt, who's going to read through some of the questions that you've hopefully been typing, and I have it open, and I see a fair number of questions have come in, more than several. So let's start answering those.
All right, thank you very much, Stephanie. So I'm going to ask Jean and Kristen on the line to unmute themselves and stand ready. We do have a number of questions about review. I'm going to go through some other questions first, and there are a lot of them, and we do have some time, but I doubt we'll get to all of them. So I apologize for that, and certainly feel free to follow up with us, afterwards if your questions aren't answered. And these are in no particular order, or I'll try to go through, in general, the order in which they were submitted. This is a good question. Does the CRP replace or supplement the Phase 2B or Bridge program? So it doesn't. Go ahead.
So I guess I can take that. It does not replace the Phase 2B or Bridge program, and I believe when we're talking about the Bridge program, we're talking about the NCI Bridge program. So the National Cancer Institute is not participating in the CRP at this time. So if you have an application, if you have a grant with the NCI, you should go through their Bridge program and certainly contact your program official. So this is not replacing the Phase 2B program, but can be used in conjunction with the Phase 2B. Again, it's important to contact your program official if you have a Phase 2B and you're thinking about submitting a CRP, or you're not sure if you should do a Phase 2B or a CRP. It's important to talk to us ahead of time about that.
Great, thank you. Stephanie, also, you're making a little bit of an echo, so Maybe I'll answer a question or two, or three. Maybe you can either dial in or switch over to the mic or something.
Okay.
Is the $3 million a hard cap? Yes, it is. Cannot be exceeded, no waivers, nothing. It is a hard cap. Now, as also are the limitations that the other institutes have placed on their programs. And so the institutes have listed lower limits. Those are hard caps for those institutes. So please keep that in mind. Is there an electronic application package available? There is. You can go into the FOAs and you'll have two buttons to press, either apply through Assist or apply using downloadable forms. And either way, you'll be fine. We got this question a number of times. What about a fast track? We've been awarded a fast track and we come in for a CRP. The answer is yes. You have to be in the phase 2 or completed the phase 2 portion of the fast track within the past 3 years. If you are still in the phase 1 portion of the fast track, you cannot apply to the CRP until you get to the phase 2 portion. Do you have to complete the phase 2 before applying for the CRP? Can you apply while still in the middle of phase 2? The answer is yes. You can apply during phase 2, but the phase 2 must be awarded. And so some questions about NCI. I'm well aware of that. So NCI, and some questions about other institutes who aren't on. Questions related to, will they come on later? Why aren't they on? What happens after 2017? And so the institutes all had options to be on or off, one or the other, and they have a variety of reasons why they chose not to be on or not, and what can you do if they're not on it. You can discuss your grant with them. It's possible you can still apply for a phase 2B if you haven't already, and the ability of, and they have the option to sign on within the time remaining if they choose. And what happens after 2017, it will be up to Congress. The program expires by law after 2017, so it has to be renewed for that. Can you apply simultaneously for CRP with a phase 2 resubmission? Well, the answer is probably no, because if you're resubmitting a phase 2, you haven't been awarded the phase 2, and you have to have an active or previously awarded phase 2 in order to apply for a CRP. All right, Gene and Kristen, are you there?
Yep, we're here.
All right, I'm going to cherry pick out some of the review questions we got through the list here, okay?
Okay.
We just, who will compose the review panel?
Gene, do you want to take that? Or?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm echoing. The review panel will be made up of the appropriate experts based on the topics covered by the application submitted. There will be a heavy emphasis on reviewers from industry because of the emphasis on commercialization readiness. Great.
We covered this, but we want to just readdress what study section will review the proposals. And we had another question, will they be reviewed in SBIR panels?
They will not be reviewed.
The panel will be largely SBIR-like, but it will not be a current panel. It'll be, these are special emphasis panels that are designed and assembled specifically for this topic.
Great. So they will not be reviewed alongside phase 1s and 2s and fast tracks. They'll be in their own special panel.
That's correct.
Do you use external or internal reviewers?
Always external. Members of the scientific community, members of the industrial community, experts.
Great. Let me just scroll through here real quick about review questions.
Matt, while you're scrolling, and I know that we're all actually kind of hearing an echo now, but one of the questions that I did see is the question of, if I was awarded a fast track, am I eligible? And the question here is, are you in your phase 2? Is the phase 2 component active? A fast track, as some of you may or may not know, is the phase 1 and the phase 2 are all part of the same application. But when it's awarded, we award the phase 1 component first, and then it goes through an administrative review instead of the standard peer review between phase 1 and phase 2. And after that administrative review, the phase 2 is awarded. So once you are in the phase 2 component of your fast track, you then have a phase 2 grant and can come in for the CRP.
Great, thank you. I just want to note to everybody, we know there's a bit of echoing, and the GoToWebinar technical team says there is some audio issues, but so hopefully that's nothing that we're doing, but it may be a little bit more system-wide, so please bear with us. All right, I didn't quite see any other review questions, but if we come across them, we will definitely ask them again. Is assembly of documentation 510K allowed?
So
Stephanie?
assembly of the materials required for the FDA to get FDA approval is allowed as part of the technical assistance. And often it's required that you have, it's important to have consultants or others that have worked with the FDA previously to help you get those materials available. So that would all be part of the technical assistance component of the CRP.
Great. Currently, the PI of an STTR award does not need to be employed by the small business. If a CRP award is to follow onto a phase 2 STTR, are you saying the PI must now be employed by the small business? And the answer is yes, we are, because we're following SBIR rules using SBIR funds. And when we get down to this commercialization stage, this is really the realm of mostly company work. Can you apply to a different institute than the one you received the phase 2 from, say from NINDS to CDC?
So as the program announcement is currently written, you are applying for the CRP to the institute where you got your phase 2. It's the two follow. So you can't, as Matt noted in his example, going from, say, NINDS to the CDC. And that's because the CRP is linked with the phase 2 that you've received. So in theory, it should be on the same kinds, the same scope, the same kind of thing that you were doing in the phase 2.
Great. Are these CRPs available if the parent grant is in a no-cost extension? Additionally, what does it mean by the 3 years? So certainly, yes, if no-cost extension is fine for applying for the CRP if you're in phase 2. Also, the 3 years is from the active award. So if the phase 2 ended 3 years, let's say 2 years ago, you're fine. If the phase 2 ended 3 years ago, you're fine. If the phase 2 ended 3 years and 1 day ago, then you're not fine. And that's based on your submission date. What types of marketing plan assistance will be included?
So as we noted, we listed some examples in the program announcement itself, and I would encourage you to read through the slides and read through some of those specific examples. And again, contact program staff if you're concerned that your specific example or what you're thinking about proposing isn't within scope. You can contact us, and we can talk to you about if the CRP is the best fit.
Okay, great. More questions about switching institutes. I think we've established that you have to go to the institute where you got the phase 2 from if they're on the CRP. The caps per institute are hard caps. We got a few questions about NHLBI on the technical assistance one. They're 50K. If you read the solicitation in the budget section, you will not see them listed. That is because they issued a notice a few days after it went out to clarify their budget position of $50,000 total cost. So near the top of it, there's a link to an NHLBI notice. It's also a link within the slide set, which you'll have in a day or two, indicating that.
And that is a correction. So please follow that correction.
That's correct. We already just covered our filing fees for patent or FDA application covered. They are not. Those are unallowable costs at the agency, let alone the CRP. Let me just go here. Does the technical assistance for manufacturing, 027, include costs for capital equipment, automation, and scale-up?
So for the larger commercialization readiness pilot program announcement, we would allow for, potentially allow for manufacturing technical assistance, but the research and development is really supposed to be later stage research and development. So if there's research and development associated with the manufacturing, that would potentially be included. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Matt.
Yeah, capital equipment. So that's a challenging situation. I don't think we look favorably upon, a $3 million equipment request in and of itself. I think there needs to be more to it than that, more R&D to do, more work to do.
But I think there is often research and development once you get to the point where you're trying to, manufacture, say, a device, is often very different than what might have been occurring in the lab. And if there's specific development or research activities that you need to do in order to appropriately scale up and get the product to the point of manufacture, that could certainly be included.
Great. Please define the difference between replicating studies and clinical trials for the institutes who don't support clinical trials.
Replicating studies. So what we're talking about there are animal studies, potentially, that may need to be replicated before you can move to the next step. Now, as many of you know, the NIH is really looking at rigor and reproducibility as a critical thing to look at when you're moving something through the translational process. And so often that to reproduce something, it has to be done in an independent laboratory. And in this situation, given that the CRP allows us to outsource more than what's in a standard SBIR, it would allow you to get independent replication of your studies so that you can move forward with confidence to the next step in translation.
Great. Does the CRP require matching funds similar to some institutes' Phase 2B programs?
No, it does not. However, obviously if you have matching funds, that would be great to hear. And it does have a fundraising plan component as part of the commercialization plan. So it's important to have a plan for you to move forward after the CRP, after your Phase 2 or in your Phase 2B, to really know what's the plan for fundraising after the NIH funding ends.
Great. More questions about patent fees. How can you pay for patent fees? So you can, how do companies pay for patent fees or filing fees? A company could use its fee for part of that. The fee is an unrestricted type of funding to the company, but they cannot use the direct or indirect costs. So within the CRP awards, it's limited to the fee and other company resources.
And again, just to emphasize a point that Matt made earlier, that $3 million is a hard cap, and it does include the fee. So it's direct, indirects, and fees all have to be under $3 million for that technical assistance and research and development CRP.
Yes. Here's a good one. While clearly beneficial, does this program take away from the funding for a regular SBIR Phase 1 and 2 awards? The answer is necessarily yes. We have the authority to use up to 10% of the SBIR set aside. This is at the discretion of the participating institutes. So they have the authority to spend up to 10%, and how much they spend on any one award or in total is up to them, so long as they don't go over 10%. And obviously, it's you know, the institutes, as always, make funding decisions based on the available budget, program balance, scientific merit, and balance of the portfolio, Phase 1s versus fast tracks versus CRPs. And so this will be at the discretion of the institute to balance that. But it is well understood that these follow-on awards are important, but do come from the SBIR set-aside, up to 10%. Here's a very interesting one. How far can you deviate from the original program goals? For example, if my Phase 2 was for indication A, but the technology also supports indication B, can we propose CRP for development of indication B? And so I would say that the CRP is a follow-on, like a 2B, is a follow-on to a Phase 2 for the same project, for the technology, for the same indication. If you've got another indication that you're looking for support for, that would be essentially a new proposal at the beginning of the program, or perhaps during Phase 2, depending on how you do it.
And also, that would be a great instance, again, to talk to the program official. Ask them, tell them about your specific situation, and ask them what advice could they give? What's our best strategy to move forward?
Great. Do you know why clinical trials are not allowable by many of the funding institutes under CRP?
Well, I can answer that for NINDS. We have specific program announcements for clinical trials through the SBIR program and actually through our standard R01 program as well. And we allow clinical trials only through those specific program announcements. As the CRP is a pilot, we chose not to write a separate CRP program for clinical trials. So at this time, the CRP for us doesn't cover clinical trials. That said, if you're planning on proposing a clinical trial, or you're at the point of a clinical trial and you're at NINDS, I would encourage you to contact me. If you're with one of the other institutes, contact those other institutes. And in the program announcement, several institutes actually had links to their specific clinical trials programs. So look at the program announcement, go to maybe one of those other programs, or contact your program official, and we can help find, there are other programs, we can help find potentially another program that will work for you.
Great. Here's a question on dual assignments. If a funded SBIR that has a funding assignment through an institute not listed in the CRP announcements, but it had a secondary or dual assignment, and that institute is on the CRP, could they apply to the CRP? And the answer is no. The only thing that in the end counts is the funding institute listed on your award. The two letters next to the activity code.
That's the primary assignment.
Primary assignment, that's correct. Are AIDS-related grant proposals allowed? Yes, they are. They come in on the main deadlines of January, April, and September 5th, but it has to be a following a Phase 2 from one of the participating institutes. But we do accept AIDS applications. Can the CRP fund activities needed to gain the CE mark, enabling export to Europe?
The CRP can cover those activities. That said, keep in mind again that where the work is located, where the work occurs, those rules associated with the SBIR still apply. So foreign work is something that it's only if it can't be done in the United States. The other thing is, obviously we like to see things approved, treatments approved here in the United States, although I recognize that for medical devices, often a CE, going to Europe is the first step. So I would encourage you to talk to your program official and discuss the plan and what you're planning to propose. And I think that's generally a good piece of advice regardless. But technically, yes, you can have that as be part of the overall plan, although, certainly we mentioned the FDA specifically in the program announcement. And
Great.
I would also like to add that, often since many people are working to bring, maybe go to Europe first, but then are working on approval in the United States, I would encourage you to start, talking to the FDA earlier rather than later, as usually some of the tests that you use to get approval in Europe also are required for FDA approval, so you don't want to have to do those twice.
Great. We had a couple of questions about resubmission. Can you resubmit a CRP application? How many times?
They have.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it has the same kind of submission policy as any other NIH grant.
That's correct. So you can submit 2 times, the first time and the resubmission we call the A1. Since CRPs are considered renewals of phase 2s, it really is 2 times. Are Jean and Kristen still on?
Yep, we're on.
We got a couple of review questions. And very important question, especially for this community. It's usually about conflict. If industry experts are reviewing, how are...
You got cut off in the last part of...
All right. Well, it's about conflict of interest. So if industry experts are reviewing, how are conflicts of interest avoided?
Obviously, we try to get the experts that match that match the expertise required by the application. If we identify an expert that is so close with what the interests of the applicant are, we try to identify one that has all the appropriate expertise but is not directly a competitor of the applicant.
Right, and it's the same answer for how do you avoid a lot of company-related confidential info. How do you avoid conflict of interest? Sometimes reviewers are from rival companies, and I think you answered that quite well.
If there's any concerns by the applicants, that they should contact the SRO and discuss it with them. Obviously, it's a fine line that we run to try to identify the very, very best reviewers for any given application without crossing that line into identifying direct competitors of that technology.
And if somebody knows of a specific individual who they feel is a direct competitor and they're concerned about them being in conflict, can they put that specific individual or that specific company in the cover letter?
They can absolutely do that. They can absolutely do that, and it would be advantageous if they gave a heads up. They would probably be contacted by the SRO to specifically outline their concerns for these applications, and we in review have found that sometimes concerns overly conservative or overly great concerns by the applicant are sometimes the reviewer that they think are most in conflict may actually be the greatest proponent of their technology, since they can appreciate it the best. So it certainly is a fine line to try to identify the reviewer that has the best expertise without crossing over into being a direct competitor.
Great. And a question, how does one volunteer to be a reviewer from industry for these applications?
Potential reviewers are welcome to contact the SRO directly.
Great. And the SRO contact is listed in Section 7 at the bottom of both of those solicitations very clearly. Can a company file for multiple CRP, Technical Assistance Awards, one for FDA, one for manufacturing, one on the CE mark? And the answer is no. It's going to be one CRP award per Phase 2 or 2B. So
that said, if a company has more than one Phase 2 and would like to apply for a CRP related to Phase 2 on one disease and one disorder and a CRP related to a completely different Phase 2, that could be allowable. And I would encourage you to, again, contact program staff, but provided it's two separate Phase 2s.
Yes, correct. Two separate awards. Yes. Is there a budget limit for technical assistance under the 027, which is the technical assistance plus late stage, with the remainder available for R&D? So is there a 300K limit for technical assistance on the larger CRP with the difference going to R&D or late stage development?
We did not make that limit. However, when you're putting your budget together, keep in mind it needs to be well justified. And I think looking carefully at your budget and making sure that what you request is reasonable for the activities proposed.
Okay, great. If the Phase 2B ended 3 years ago or less, are you okay to apply? The answer is yes. Here's a review question. Scientists in industry are not always savvy to the various issues that define the net present value of a product, and whether it can be commercialized. How will you determine how well reviewers understand this? Will you be able to recruit marketing experts or other types of expertise as part of the review panel?
We'll recruit expertise to cover all aspects of the applications, and we will definitely be doing reviewer training. And in addition to that, as far as making sure there's a good fit, we'll do as much as we can in terms of seeing what those reviewers have produced themselves to match them with the application. But we'll also be reading critiques in advance of the review meeting and ensuring that they understand the review criteria and are a good fit to review that application.
Great. So another note here, NCI is not listed. Is there an equivalent program for NCI? Is it the Bridge program? So NCI and many other institutes are not. And if you've got a Phase 2 or 2B, you should discuss with them your options. Maybe if Bridge or 2B, maybe something else. But if they're not on it, they are not on it. They could, and they could choose to be on it if they want to later on. Are cGMP drug manufacturing for Phase 1 clinical trials allowed? I assume under the larger 027 CRP.
So this is a question about manufacturing clinical study materials, and that is one of the bullets that is allowed. However, again, keep in mind you can't. Not every institute will accept clinical trials through the CRP.
So this actually leads very well into the next question. Are you making a distinction between clinical study and clinical trial for those institutes that do not support clinical trials?
So it depends on, I would read carefully what each institute indicated in their description. There's specific descriptions for each institute in that technical assistance and late stage development CRP. I can speak for NINDS that yes, I am making, in there, my language does make a distinction between a clinical study and a clinical trial. The definition of a clinical trial at NIH is roughly put an intervention, so there has to be an interventional component. The specific definition of clinical trials, I can, if you have a specific question about whether or not what you're doing is a clinical trial, I would encourage you to, again, reach out to program staff and ask them, is this covered? When you say you don't cover clinical trials, is this what you mean? Is this considered a clinical trial? So if you're doing, and I would state, if you're doing any kind of human subjects work, if you are doing any kind of either clinical study or clinical trial, I would rather have you reach out to the program officials and ask that question and make sure you get a clear answer. Because I have found it's one of the, if I want to pick one of the most frequently asked questions I get is this considered a clinical trial? More often than not, people aren't exactly sure where they stand, or they may select, think they are, but they aren't, and vice versa. So please reach out and talk to us ahead of time.
Oh, sorry about that. I was muted.
I was wondering. I was about to ask.
Can the technical assistance for regulatory submission be used for submission to the Drug Discovery Tools DDT program at the FDA? I would say since, go ahead.
No, I was going to let, please go ahead.
I mean, I would say since that's a program at another federal agency, the answer is probably going to be no.
I think the real distinction and a quick way to think about it is, if you're getting money from the NIH to turn around and give to another federal agency, the answer is going to be no. Is that a fair, quick and dirty assessment?
A couple, one or two reviews questions. Will the roster of potential reviewers be published 30 days ahead, like they are for other panels?
Yes, they will.
Great, and that's all available on CSR's website, and in fact, the link is usually available within your ERA Commons account to the review information. Again, we've got people who are coming in late. All of the slides, recording, including recording of this Q&A, will be posted shortly, hopefully by the end of the week, if not early next week, and we will send an email around to everyone about that. This was a question for review, and it was one that you thought might be asked, Jean. What meeting format will be used for the review of these applications, in person, IAM, or VAM? And you can maybe describe each of those, but then go ahead and answer.
Certainly. It certainly depends on the number of applications that come into this program, associated with these program announcements, and we gauge them toward that. It will likely be seeing the interest here right now. It would be a larger format, and if it is a larger format, we would go to a face-to-face or probably a VAM. One or the other. The larger format would be face-to-face. IAM, all the formats that we use here at CSR for review are deemed to be compatible and comparable with each other. People have their own preferences, certainly. IAM is Internet-Assisted Review, where it's essentially reviewers will meet online and submit their opinions online throughout the meeting. I anticipate with the response so far that I've seen to this that will probably not be the one that is used.
Great. Another review, will industry reviewers be selected from small business only or from companies larger than small businesses?
I think it'll depend upon what expertise we need. I think we need to see the applications that come in and see what experts we have available to us before making that call. My guess is we'll try to lean towards small business, people from small businesses, but again, expertise will be the priority.
And folks from larger businesses, in some cases, have started off in small businesses, and but certainly together with the topics as well as the business aspects of it, we would again identify folks that could span actually from academia to business, small business to possibly large business. And as Kristen mentioned, we will get the folks with the expertise required for this.
Great, thank you. We got a number of questions on how many applications do you expect, how many awards will you make, things like that. The quite honest answer is we don't know. That'll be essentially up to you as how many, to you, the greater you, on how many come in the door. Of course, that the submission is limited to Phase 2 and 2B awardees from the institutes participating, and in the end, there's no set amount of awards to be made or not made. It will all be dependent on the what comes in, the quality of the project, the commercial potential, the budget and priorities within the institutes who are participating in the CRP and their program balance between their science, Phase 1, 2, and CRP. We honestly won't know. And it's something we will keep a track of and publish every fiscal year as we do for all of our other metrics. There are other questions. Most of them are relatively specific, and if there's a project-specific question, definitely feel free to contact the program officer. How many review panels are planned? It will probably honestly depend on how many applications come in the door every round, and the break of science. I think that with that, I would like to thank all of you for participating today. Got a question of how many folks were on the webinar. We got almost 1,000 registered, and I wasn't keeping an eye on it, but we hit at least 600 to 700 at our peak. We still have over 400 hanging out now. So we want to thank all of you for attending. Thank Stephanie, Jean, and Kristen, and Betty for helping us run the webinar today. Again, the slides will be posted, the recording, and the written transcript, so the word transcript. That's probably a really easy way to get all the Q&A. Within a few days, we will send a note out over email to everybody. Thank you very much, and happy holidays to everyone.